Hello and welcome back to our discussion series with myself, Everett, and Katherine, who are both present for another recording. I believe this is part 6, maybe it's part 5. It's been a couple of months since we have done a discussion, so I'm not going to try to pretend like I remember everything we talked about from the previous video. Instead, we're going to jump into a couple of topics of discussion. We did discuss this a little bit before the recording and decided that we were going to talk a little bit about the responsibilities that come with being a leader and maybe more specifically an elder at PBC, and then also what responsibilities are present for a husband and father at home, and I guess specifically spiritual responsibilities, and go from there. So, Everett, I think you had said that you had a couple of questions that you wanted to ask us to kind of kick things off, and then we'll just see where things go from there.
Okay, and yeah, and also it's been 9 months, and I have a lot of
Wow.
that is due to my own busyness at work, and so I apologize for that, and I appreciate both of your uh, respective patiences with uh, with all of that.
Yeah, I said two
Uh,
months. That was really wrong. That
yeah,
okay.
today's January 7th, 23, and we were last together on March 26th. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so uh, yeah, let me I guess let me start with a specific question, and that is, did Steve encourage us and encourage the PBCC congregation to disregard the Diocese of San Jose?
Aren't there kind of two answers to that question? Uh, there's the
Well, there's the right one.
no,
Maybe there's another
because
one too.
when you word it like that, when you say encourage to disregard, there's a active meaning to that and a passive meaning to that, right? The active is to explicitly say words like, you should not listen to these people, you are not subject to these people's authority, disregard them, listen to us, listen to what we're teaching you. There's that active sense of disregarding. And then there's a passive sense, which is to ignore or to not talk about in a way that would give credence to something else.
Well, so and this is where I continue my commitment to the principle of evangelize always and when necessary use words. So when I say encourage to disregard, the word encourage can could be any number of things. It could be a direct warning to disregard something, but it could also, and maybe even more effectively, could be just a disregarding oneself that then that encourages everyone else to disregard around them.
Well, okay, I think that that's what you're saying is true, but at the same time, there's a nuance involved, which is that you may choose. I think the biggest difference between the active and the passive distinction that I made is that in the passive distinction, there may be there may be cases where you are not encouraging something because you yourself may not believe it at that time, but you are being quiet about it because you are leaving a door open for other people to make their own decision, as opposed to being active where you are not only saying what you believe, but you are actively trying to control or have influence over what other people believe.
Uh, well, yeah. So one can be quiet about something because one doesn't care or one is undecided and one's fine with other people coming across that other thing on their own. And one can be quiet about something in hopes that that uh, prevents attention from being drawn toward the other thing so that no one else notices it.
Right. So that's a question
Right.
of motive then.
And so I guess so that is so when I say encourage, then yes, there's a motive. Did he have a motive to not have the people, not have us, and not have the congregation at PVCC? And we can explore both of those groups of people separately or together. Did he have a motive to want both of those groups of people to not recognize the Diocese of San Jose?
Let me throw another wrench in this, which is I think the answer is time dependent.
Okay, so you're saying the answer is different at different periods of time.
I think from what I know, I think yes. I think that
Okay.
the longer you go back in history, the greater the likelihood that uh, there was probably more of a willingness to disregard the Diocese of San Jose as opposed to more recent towards the end of his time at PBC. There's probably less of a desire or motive to do that. Would you agree with that, Catherine? I'm taking that mainly from his when he stepped down as an elder, because I know that he had been going through a multi-year uh just sort of there were a lot of things theologically for him that were fluid. And so that towards the end, he got to a point where he was not theologically comfortable being an elder at PBC anymore. And so he stepped down. And he had to define in his own mind what that breaking point was. And I don't know if I could say what that is. I don't know what that is. But I think wherever that fluidity reached a critical mass for him and he was still at PBC, his motive was probably different at that point than it was before. But then again, I don't know if he was still teaching at that point. By teaching, I mean like preaching or doing classes or anything. I don't know if he was still doing that. So I wouldn't be able to give you a definitive timeline where that started and where it ended. Catherine might have a better memory on that or have better knowledge on that. I don't know.
I mean, I think I'm comfortable saying that as he himself began to believe more and more in the authority of the Catholic Church, therefore the Diocese of San Jose, there obviously that would have impacted him and any teaching he was doing. Although agreed, the timeline on that is I know it was very long and drawn out. I think that's fair to say.
Yes.
But as to more specific timing in there, I don't know. I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. And I don't remember. So yeah. I mean, I'm not okay. So I'm not trying to like not as well as answering Jeremy's question, but I'm not trying to like be vague in my response. I think it's a tricky question to answer. I think I'm more qualified to answer what he taught us, because the reality is that I don't have a very good memory of what he taught and how he taught at PBC. I think partially because I was just too young to really actually engage with the material. I'm aware that he was an elder in terms of teaching. I know he preached, I know he taught some classes. I didn't hear the content of most of those classes, and I don't remember the content of the preaching. So it's hard for me to analyze that. In terms of like what I thought it's fair to say was being communicated. I do think on some fundamental level, you walk into a church that's Christian type church, which again, that's just such a broad term, but a Christian type church that's not Catholic, there is some understanding that you are walking into a church that doesn't acknowledge the authority of the Catholic Church. I think that's fair to say. Yeah,
Okay.
one level, right? And so I will not, yeah, of course. Now, there's such broad belief in what I've seen in the broader Christian community about, what works for you works for you. So if Catholicism works for you, that's great. If going to a home church works for you, that's great. If being a Lutheran works for you, that's great. And so the whole idea of like rejecting the authority, I think that gets really muddy. And I also just don't, yeah. In terms of let me just stop there. Am I generally answering your question?
I don't know. To me, the answer is yes, and I'm still not understanding the need for the multiple minutes of nuance that both of you provided to that question.
Well, because
if you think the nuance is false, then sure. But if the nuance is true, then it's true. And so if it's true, we should talk about it.
You're trying to do a two-step cross-examination. Did he teach to reject the Catholic Church? Okay, well, if we define Protestantism as rejecting the authority of the Catholic Church, then he taught Protestantism, right? Like, I get where you're trying to go, and I just think that there's so much gray area. We're not gonna all get to the answer that you want, because I do think there's a lot of gray area in there. But I will freely admit that you don't go to a Protestant church and sit there and be there and teach there if you really think that you're supposed to be going to mass down the street.
Okay, and
there's a mass obligation. If you really believe in that, you're going to be there instead.
Right, but can we all recognize, because this is one of the things I feel like constantly gets lost in these discussions, is that moment where you say to yourself, I should be at mass and not here at PBC, it's not a step function. It can take years to get to that place, and years of gray area and muddiness and indecision about your own theology to get to the point where where your conscience no longer allows you to do what you've been doing your whole life, and your conscience demands that you do something different.
But that is something that Everett has experienced, and I have experienced. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But the muddiness that's occurring in one's own mind is itself in contrast to the clarity of the clarity of having answered the question.
Well, but I think maybe you could ask this question, which is, did he at any point is what he taught, and by teach I'll define as speaking words from a pulpit.
Yeah, which is that's going to be your definition.
Or a class, which I think there were still pulpits. Well, okay, but was there a point at which maybe that definition doesn't even matter for what I'm about to say. Was there a point at which he taught something that he didn't believe? And I don't know if any of us would be able to definitively say yes to that. Did he ever knowingly teach against his conscience? I don't know if I can answer that question.
But I think that's a like I understand that's a question, but I don't actually think that's the primary question we're focusing on, which is, just to be very explicit, you have the statement that's very contested. I never taught Protestantism, or whatever the statement is. I did not teach it, or I forget the exact wording. So whether or not that's
Sure.
accurate, which that's different than.
Well, but no, but it's kind of, but not really, because if he believes in Protestantism, or if he doesn't believe in whatever he thinks Protestantism is, but is teaching it, then that goes to what I said, which is that there's a hypocrisy, right? That there's either an active deception or a hypocrisy going on.
Yeah, but I think the
Well-
focus of Everett, whatever it's asking us about, would be the hypocrisy of teaching Protestantism and then later saying you didn't. Which I think that's where this muddy area is what actually was PVC purporting to teach.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
I would say, I mean, to clarify, I would say that that's what he's doing at Live Oak now, is teaching things that he doesn't. That he's words are coming out of his mouth that he knows are untrue. But, or as best as I can reconstruct it based on what's going on. But if we're talking about his time on the board, then I'm not sure. So I've always given him the benefit of the doubt, because I think he was a different person back then, that he did that he didn't ever teach something that he didn't believe. That during his time on the board, he was consistent, and when he realized that his beliefs had changed, or upon the change of his beliefs, then he resigned, or took that long leave of absence that then culminated in a resignation.
Okay, so then maybe we don't need to talk about that. That's fine.
Everett,
Okay.
I think. Okay, going back to what I think we are talking about. I guess. Okay, I'm just trying to think of helpful pieces of data that I can respond with. Growing up, I was aware that there was an anti-Catholic bias in our home, but I do not recall that ever coming from him. And the only vague recollections I have when I even was like kind of aware of Catholicism or like bias against it. I remember I did ask him about it once, and I don't remember what he said, but I walked away thinking, well, bias against them is wrong. Not
okay.
Catholicism is true, but like, like he acknowledged that what I had experienced or whatever it was bias, and that was like illogical and not, yeah. So I didn't walk away with any but honestly, other than that, I don't really remember a whole lot. I mean, of course, and we talked about the various non-Catholic, more again, general, broadly Christianish influences in our home, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been listening to Salty a lot because I have a 3-year-old, and so I'm very aware of the fact that there's nothing in Salty that's Catholic. But like, it's in like explicitly Catholic, right? It's not written by a Catholic. There's nothing in there that's super problematic. Otherwise, I wouldn't have it in my house. But like, it's just a really hard question to answer because, again, my experience of, I don't think I have a solid understanding of where exactly his theology was, but in my experience of Protestants, a lot of them don't reject Catholicism as necessarily wrong. It's just another alternative way of communicating with God, which obviously from my perspective, I disagree completely, but that's a very common belief.
Was that his belief?
And that's what I'm saying is I don't know. I don't remember, and I don't remember ever. I never remember hearing anything that was ever explicitly Catholicism is wrong. Now, can you say something that's doesn't line up with the Catholic Church and say this is true? So yes, was I allowed to take communion? And I was told that this is how we take communion. That is contrary to how I believe now. So you can say that that was encouraging me to follow up, to, go against the Catholic Church, sure. But I don't, there was never that second step of, oh, and by the way, how the Catholics do it, that's wrong.
Well, why does there need to be that second step?
Because there is such a broad way of viewing things in the general Christian community that like basically says, follow your conscience, and there are multiple ways of doing things, and they're all okay. Which again, I don't agree with, but that's
the Catherine. So okay, but isn't some of that wrong?
What do you mean? Well, yeah, I don't agree with it now.
Okay, so I guess I'm not sure. Just saying. Okay, well, there's also this. There are these other views out there that are wrong. I mean, I don't know why that other unless
Wait, what do you mean there's other views out there that are wrong? What do you mean by that?
Well, Catherine's citing to this sort of pan-Christian kumbaya type belief. Which,
I think let me try to
cross that.
Let me try to refine that a little bit, because from my perspective, I see two primary views about Catholics from most non-denominational people that I know. One primary strand is to think that Catholics are just not Christians. Mm-hmm. And the other strand is to think that Catholics are Christians, they just do and believe a lot of things that are in excess of what is needed.
I'll be right back. Sorry, you guys keep talking. I'll be right back.
All right.
I don't know whether Dad ever fell into either of those categories, and if he did, to what extent. I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I mean, I can reiterate, I can affirm or back up what Catherine's saying about influences in the home, like our homeschool curriculum, that there were definitely books where the Catholic viewpoint was taught as almost an evil.
Right. And we discussed that. I mean,
But I think But I think that the question there is not so much to drill into the specifics of what was in those books, but more who defined that curriculum for us, and to what extent should Dad have been involved in that, and to what extent was he involved in it, and is he culpable for any of that? I think that's really the question that I think we want to talk about, right?
So if you want to,
but I don't think. Well, but have we though? I don't think we've ever talked about the extent to which Dad defined curriculum.
We have talked about the BJU situation. We have not talked about the intersection, or we've only lightly touched on the intersection of the doctrine of male headship and the BJU situation.
Okay, I don't know what that means.
Not.
No, I don't know. What is what under the doctrine of male headship? How does BJU work in the household?
Yeah, I don't think there's I don't think that.
How could there possibly not be an answer?
I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that.
No Bob Jones University textbook should have ever been in our house. And to the extent that Mom and Dad are both culpable, they're both culpable. I don't know if Dad actually knew that we were buying the book. I'm not going to apply a male headship analysis, because that would be a whole separate conversation, because we would need to actually define that. But there's culpability for the fact that he was in our house.
Yeah, I'm okay saying that. Yeah, I'm comfortable saying that, to the extent that there was some unfortunate educational literature in our house, that both Mom and Dad are responsible for that, and that it wasn't just Mom that was responsible for that.
And
Yeah.
again,
I'm
with
okay
the
saying
caveat
that.
I acknowledge that homeschooling is very challenging and finding textbooks must be absolutely insane. So, right, like I don't.
Well,
With that
okay, but
caveat, but still not okay.
did I just hear someone? I forget which one. Did one of you just raise the possibility that Steve did not know that we were using BJU material?
No, I don't know if I think there were textbooks that mom bought without dad. I don't think dad like signed off on everything. So a lot of that was what mom was doing. He did. The conversation I'm talking that I referenced a few minutes ago was this whole section on how awful Catholics were. And then I went and talked to him about it because it bothered me.
Yeah, but to be honest, I don't know that dad actually, like, if you had sat down with dad at the time, back in, I don't know, whatever, after the critical mass of books we had all gone through them, if you had sat down with him and said, Dad, list the textbooks and the companies that provided the textbooks for each of our different subject matter, I don't know if he would have been able to do that.
Well, it isn't
Honestly, we probably would have had better quality if dad had, because dad's
At least for history.
Yeah.
At least for history.
Dad is a more highly qualified person to select textbook material and teaching material than mom is. Right. So I'm just saying.
Let's remind ourselves again that he is a retired textbook salesman. So yes.
Yeah, but I mean, and his additional qualifications.
Right.
Yeah, but,
and he has a master's and a long-standing recreational interest in history. Yes.
And almost a PhD in history. Yeah. So
yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, I think we're
in a rabbit hole.
There is culpability for the decisions about what literature we used for our homeschool education. I don't think either Katherine or I would defend against that statement.
Okay. But you're not wanting to tie that into the doctrine of male headship at this moment?
Also really
No, I don't think we would need, I don't feel like we need to do that.
Okay. Well, Jeremy, you had brought up at the beginning one topic could be the role of his role in the home.
Yeah, and I have views about and I have views about what that should look like, but I don't know if Dad has the same views and what the views were then. So I don't know if I can, to the extent that there's a crossover with homeschool education, I don't know. Is it really helpful for us to do that? Or is time better spent talking about the extent to which there were things in the home that were anti-Catholic and what Dad said when those things were presented to him?
Well,
isn't that more important?
I think that's a little sliver of the that's a sliver of what's important.
With respect to what happened inside the home?
Sure. But
okay.
Could I go back to something Katherine said earlier?
Sure.
And now I'm fearing this. Now I'm fearing this is going to turn into a Francis Ford Coppola film because Katherine is. Catherine's just brought an orange onto the screen.
Well, this YouTube recording will have no video, so no one will see that. No one would have known if you hadn't said something.
Okay, fine. That's fair enough. So yeah. So minus minus video. This is not a Francis Ford Coppola film. So Katherine, you had talked about the duties of being a Roman Catholic, and one of them is attendance at Mass. So could you list off a few of those? What are the what are the membership obligations? And I know I'm not using your terminology, I'm using mine, but what are some of those?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word membership, but there are certain obligations for Catholics. So it would be mass every Sunday, and then holy days of obligation. Hold on.
Okay. We just needed to lose audio with Katherine for a second.
No, it's
which is compounded by the Francis Ford Coppola nature of some of what's been going on in the background. Well, okay, so while we've lost audio with Katherine, I guess
looks like maybe
Jeremy.
she's about to come back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Oh,
she's
okay.
back.
Thomas the Tank Engine was scary, so
Oh,
we needed to check in with Mom.
Okay.
There was a storm.
That's good.
Okay, so mass on holy days of obligation, which they're scattered throughout the year.
And so just so, because I honestly don't quite know what that means. Does that mean Sundays plus some additional specific days?
Yes.
Okay. And
it'll usually be like a major feast day, and whatever day that falls on, it could be any day during the week.
Okay. And by mass is the taking of communion.
No.
Is that would you consider that a separate obligation?
It's not an obligation.
It's not an obligation. Okay.
You could only receive if you are in a state to receive it. And if there's sin that would bar you from doing that, the expectation is go to confession and then go to mass. But you don't have to do that to go to mass.
Okay. So
there's plenty of people that go to mass and sit there or go for a blessing instead, but don't. Yeah, you are not obligated to receive.
Okay.
And maybe there's something that says, you probably should try to receive at least once a year. I think you're supposed to go to confession at least once a year, so they might put that in. But as a general expectation, no, you do not have to receive every single Sunday.
Okay, and that was actually going to be my next question. Maybe you answered it. So, if you're not in the, so you're supposed to be fully confessed when you take communion.
You can't have committed a mortal sin.
Okay.
And there are mortal and venial sins. So, even without agreeing about what sin is, we all know that we all make mistakes and, do dumb bad things all the time.
Aren't there also cardinals? Is a cardinal sin, is that the same as a venial sin?
I don't remember.
Okay. But anyway, so I get that.
Mortal
that's
sins
a little
are bad, are pretty serious.
Okay. So you're supposed to have either not committed a mortal sin since your last confession. Well, you're supposed to have not committed a mortal sin since your last confession when you take communion.
Correct.
Okay. And then
just in general, not commit mortal sins.
Yes, in general, it's just a good idea to not commit mortal sins.
Okay. But are you, is there an obligation, and you sort of answered this already, but is there an obligation to to every so often be in a state where you can and then do take communion?
I know I should know this. I think there is a requirement that you go to confession once a year. I mean, I think most people go, a lot of Catholics go more than that.
Okay.
Like every couple weeks, or I try to go monthly. So I've never hit up against that or been like, oh, I need to go check what the obligation is, just because I've always gone, I know much more frequently than whatever the requirement is, but I think it is yearly you're supposed to go.
Okay. What are other obligations?
There's a couple days of fasting.
Okay.
And then Lent, abstaining from meat on Fridays.
Okay. Is the fasting, how long is that fast? Is that a 24-hour fast?
It's
a daytime fast?
It's a really it's like a really weak sauce fasting compared to what I think a lot of other Christian denominations do. It's no, it's a day. I mean, I guess that is 24 hours, yeah, but you're allowed to eat. It's just it's a limited amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that note, just a little bit of a side note, but I this is coming back to me now. The board of elders, the elders practiced fasting. But that was another one of the
Probably a
elders.
lot more rigorous than what the church.
I think it was. If I recall, Steve was always fairly stoic when it came to food stuff, but yes, I remember it being kind of rigorous. Okay, so there's some fasting. Is there is there a financial obligation that I'm somewhere in my mind? There's a financial obligation that is called Peter's something or other. Is that? Am I just totally?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, it's like
Generally,
you give Peter's share or something. Okay.
My understanding of church teaching is that you were encouraged to give of yourself, but that may not necessarily be monetary if you're not in a place to do that. But then like give your time. There's also, we're talking about like rules that are very set in stone, and then there's also like more like guidance. So okay. there are multiple levels of what we're talking about here.
When you give a donation at a parish, is there a percentage of that donation that is then earmarked for the Vatican? Is that a thing, or am I not remembering that? I may just be wrong about all of what I'm remembering there. Okay,
I'd be very surprised if that's the case, but I don't. But I really don't know. I don't know.
So what? Okay, so there's some obligation.
Yes.
And is would we all agree that Steve, from prior to my existence onward, would have been fully versed in all of that?
From your birth onwards?
Yeah, back all the way through the Michigan years.
I was not born. So
I know.
Definitely don't know, but like whatever.
You're saying if he would have been aware 40 years ago of all the things that Katherine just said?
I don't think that's. I don't know. No, I do have to acknowledge that, like,
I don't know.
Medieval history is his expertise, and so before there was anything other than the Catholic Church in terms of Christianity generally, so he's well versed in the historical side of these things, but knowing I don't know. So I think that's fair to say, and that's definitely not a conclusion that I could draw based on what I know.
Well, look, and maybe a side note here would be helpful, because for those who don't know, right, when we're talking about his study, when we're talking about what he was doing at the University of Michigan, when he was talking about what he's done since, a large percentage of that was studying Roman Catholicism. Right, like that was a fairly large chunk of what he studied.
Wasn't his thesis regarding some sort of Catholic doctrine?
I actually don't know what thesis he was working on. It could quite possibly have been.
But I don't know that for sure.
And I don't even know how far
into
his thesis he ever got.
I don't know.
But he was studying like if you're studying Charlemagne.
Okay, Everett.
Right.
What you're getting at is that he had a working knowledge that there are probably literal obligations that Catholics have versus what a lot of like non-denominational churches, they don't have obligations usually, right?
PBC it wasn't framed like that at all. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm sure at some point when we were kids, yes, he had the knowledge that there were literally obligations, and he was not meeting them, and he was not having us meet them.
Right. Okay.
I'm willing to acknowledge that. Yeah, I'm not.
All right.
I was not raised in any way Catholic. I'm not trying to argue that I was.
Okay. I'm glad that periodically you you contribute with a moment of clarity into this conversation. That's
Well,
great.
I don't see. I need to be reminded why this matters.
Because so what I'm trying to establish here is right, there are affirmative duties to being a Roman Catholic that he would have known of, at least in part. I think it's safe to say he knew about he knew about transubstantiation going way back. And and so when he's sitting there actively or passively or whatever these differentiations that you two are emphasizing, that whatever those were in his mind over time, he knew that that Roman Catholics think you're supposed to do X, and my kids are not doing X, and the congregants at PBCC are not doing X. Like he knew that in his brain at all times throughout all of this.
Well, I think that's fair to say, but I don't think then you can take the jump to that I don't know how to articulate it, but I think that there are a lot of non-denominational churches out there where you walk in and the kind of underlying assumption is everyone needs to go with their conscience. If their conscience is taking them to the Catholic Church down the street, great, because they believe in some really basic fundamental things, like Jesus died on a cross for our sins. You want to go to the Methodist Church, cool, because they also believe in those very basic things. We believe in those basic things here, therefore, like, great that you're here, but we understand if you want to go down the street. But we're encouraging you to kind of make those decisions for yourself.
But the reason I'm concerned about you raising that is not because there are people who that this like I think I call pan Christian kumbaya. I get there are people who believe that certainly, and I'm sure we've all run into them probably a number of times. But what are you saying that was the belief of PBCC or Steve's belief, or what? I mean, the fact that view is out there, I have not yet to hear a connection between those people and anything we've been talking about.
That's fair. I don't think I remember enough about what was taught at PBC to say whether or not that was the case, although I don't think it's a stretch to say that it would have been or was. I just don't think I don't think I was old enough. I wasn't old enough to have a sophisticated enough understanding, which sure is then, of course, you can then be like, well, if you weren't old enough, then wasn't it, kind of dad's responsibility to then be guiding you if you weren't old enough to kind of be developing your own opinions about the church you were at. And I don't think PBC was like far away from that since it was non-denominational. It's pretty bare bones in terms of what their theology was, because it seems like everyone who got up there to teach seemed to have like different perspectives on things, and if that's just a given, then obviously there's
okay. I'm going to disagree with some of it. So first of all, let's remember we spent like an entire session with me at least attempting to establish that non-denominationalism is itself a crucial and exclusive belief. Right. So I'm sticking with that thesis. But second, what we were what was the other thing? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the other thing that you said. Sorry. No, that there was that the sermons were a sort of symposium of different views. I don't think that at all.
Okay, maybe that's not true.
I think they were a different. I think there was a myriad of styles and parts of scripture that were focused on by different pastors. I wouldn't necessarily say that that there weren't threads that tie them together. But I also don't really see why that matters either.
Well, no, it matters in that there was a coherent the lectern, the lectern, the sermons at PBC were not. I would say were not an example of pan-Christian kumbaya. I mean, I think that the Board of Elders maintained a very tight control over the teaching, and that's why the bulk of it was assigned to the 3 teaching pastors, and then of that other group, that was primarily a group of about maybe a half a dozen to a dozen rotating people, Steve being one of them, who were within that secondary group of people, were regulars at the pulpit and could be trusted. I think they trusted Steve, they trusted Bernard Bell, they trusted Bob Pershey. That handful of people, they trusted to stick to the script, so to speak. And it was it was rare. I think it was rare for someone to go off message. The only example I can think of someone going off reservation, and maybe people at PBC wouldn't even agree with me on this, was that one time that Dorman Followell said that his daughter had telekinetic, not telekinetic powers, mind reading powers. That was the one time that I that struck me as they brought in an outside guest, and even though that person had been in a few times, there was an oops moment when it came to doctrine from the pulpit. Otherwise, I thought it was a pretty well-oiled machine when it came to the sort of lowercase orthodoxy that was coming from the pulpit. But I acknowledge that that's more of me being older and you guys being younger, and
yeah, and so yeah, we're not going to get past the fact that I don't remember enough, nor did I think I had the maturity enough to really analyze much of what was going on from the perspective that we're talking about. No, okay. I feel like we're going in circles a little bit, because I know like the second question here is, well, were they teaching Protestantism? And I feel like that's kind of being intermingled in what we're talking about a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I honestly,
that was the word I was looking for. Telepath, not telekinetic, telepathic. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, but yes, no, you're
telekinetic is when you move objects with your mind.
Yes, yeah, yeah. She did not have telekinetic powers. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like we are either getting lost in the weeds, or we're kind of beating around the bush, or some analogy that involves plants.
Okay.
The real question, it feels like we always come back to this question of was Protestantism taught? And there's two hot words in that sentence: Protestantism and taught, right? Mm-hmm. And in order to have any kind of meaningful discussion, you have to define your terms and then discuss them. And the problem for all of this time has been that we have not we can create a definition of Protestantism that works for our discussion, but is that definition going to be relevant to issues related to what Dad did and said? And I don't know if we're ever going to be able to get to that point, because he would need to provide that data to us. He would need to say,
Yeah.
this is what I define Protestantism as, because I'm the one that said that I didn't teach it. And then if after providing that data, we say, well, no, you're wrong about that, because your definition, under that definition, you did X, Y, and Z things that conflict with that. And we can point to specific things that conflict with that, as opposed to if he defines it in a way that is consistent with saying he didn't teach it, then the only thing that we're left with is saying, well, that's either just true and we drop the issue, or it's disingenuous. And then if you want to believe that it's disingenuous, then you have a whole nother problem and a whole nother can of worms that I don't even think that this series of discussions we're having would ever solve, right? Because that's no longer an issue with us. That's an issue between either you and him, or any number of other people, right? So that's.
Well, I understand, but that's the whole point of this, is we're resolving the issue amongst us by getting to that clarity amongst us.
But how can we ever do that? Lay out the path how we can ever get there without having that critical piece.
Well, first of all, we're the students, right? We were both in both of those groups we were talking about. We were the students at we were the congregants at PBCC, so we were the students. We were the and when we were in the home, so we were the students there. And then also, well, I guess both of you, although not me, have also, you were students at Live Oak, so there's that too. But so we know what we were taught, or we were taught. We took something away from all of that.
All right, but there's still a link missing.
I think that, well, no, because I think that we can understand what it is. We can understand what we were taught. If a teacher failed to convey the teaching correctly, then yes, that would be something that might be lost on us. But we can triangulate over enough teaching, over enough years, and we have an abundance of we have an abundance of an amount of being taught that we can triangulate some things and identify some instances of errors and inconsistencies, and there we go. We have what we have to reach our own conclusions.
Well, I think we can come to our own conclusions about whether or not we think that our experience, based on our own definitions, whether or not we were taught Protestantism by him. Sure, under our own definitions.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement.
Yeah, and we can talk about that. But whether or not it's fair to then say that how we define it is how he defined it, and then to judge his statement, that's very different. And I think that is a jump. But I also, but yes. So I mean, and this conversation has happened offline before, and we've never been able to resolve this. And I also know that I have asked for clarity about that, and I have received clarity from him on that, and it made sense to me. So I don't know if we want to talk about that or if that's helpful, but I don't.
Well, and again, and for the benefit of the audience, as I said in the last discussion, and in the 9 months since, there has been no public statement. So I continue to believe that what he said to Katherine privately is what Katherine, what your description of it is accurate. And I know what he told me, although we're not going to try to reconstruct that for reasons I've discussed previously. So we can go with his public statements versus his private statements to Katherine. And other people will have to judge that consistency or inconsistency for themselves.
By public, you mean a letter that he wrote to people in the family. That's the public. That's not really a public. I don't know if you want to.
No, I'm talking. No, much more public than that.
Well,
You're talking about
you're talking about either his outward his just public life plus maybe these video recordings or these audio recordings and our discussion about it.
Yeah, whatever public, whatever anyone who knows him, who's listening to this, whatever mechanism they're whatever mechanism they're learning from him, other than private communications between them and him.
Well, I mean, I think that was the premise for doing this to begin with, was we consented to having this discussion knowing that without committing to there being any kind of final agreement on anything, it was the idea that we were going to get certain topics, get a discussion of certain topics and get certain data into a public recorded format that then other people can listen to and judge for themselves what all that information means.
Yeah, that's right. That's still right. Yeah.
And I don't know how to, I guess what have we not done yet in these recordings? It's that being our goal. What have we not done yet in these recordings that we still need to do?
Well, I think we still need some clarity on what it is that the two of you thought was the teaching that you were receiving throughout that time.
Well, okay, then I'll be honest about that. And I think I've tried to communicate this in the past, but I'm not going to also try to claim that I remember everything that I've said in all of our episodes together. There are two buckets. One bucket is the things that either the conversations I had with Dad, the things that Dad preached or taught in a class, and the things that I overheard him say to other people, and the decisions that he made in my life as my father. All of those things, that's one bucket. And then the other bucket is everything else. So what I was taught in high school group, what I was taught in junior high group, what I was taught while I was in Mexico, what I heard other pastors saying from the pulpit, what I read from on the bulletin, those sorts of things. Those are all in a different bucket for me. So I don't hold Dad accountable for bucket number 2.
And that is a problem to me.
Okay. Well, I don't know how I can. I don't know. I don't see how anybody else can plausibly be held accountable for that. Like, I don't.
Because he was in charge.
But he wasn't in charge. He wasn't. Dad was not dictatorially in control of what we were taught in the high school group or what was on the bulletin.
And I would say, we spent a couple of the earlier sessions were me attempting to lay out my case for why up to a point I think he was responsible for those things. And I think that disagreement is a real problem, because where there's not accountability, when we have a situation where we have leaders who are not being held accountable, we are in a zone that has resulted in I think that's the zone that has resulted in the devastation that led that ultimately led to me leaving the family. Was there's not accountability for behavior. Did someone go out and take and assert authority over things and assert power to do some things, and then there's this vacuum of accountability afterwards, and it's you can't. I mean, I came to the conclusion in 2015 that that's just not tenable to live in that environment.
Okay, but I think that there's just a practical sense in which, given the way that PBC operated and given the way that human beings interact with organizations like a church of that size, there is a very, very limited amount of this power and influence that you're talking about that a single voice can have. I mean, dad could not unilaterally do anything. The only thing that dad could unilaterally do was parent us.
No, that's totally wrong.
Name one thing that dad could do at PBC unilaterally.
He could block any resolution on the floor of the board.
They had a one-person veto, right?
Yes. Every single one.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but why does that matter? But why does that matter though? Because then we'd have to have that data in front of us and say which times did dad not veto something when he should have, and did he veto something when he shouldn't have?
Okay. Well, we know what he didn't veto, roughly speaking.
I don't. I mean, I don't know what.
Well, everything he didn't veto became the reality around us.
Yeah, but that's a slippery slope to me. I don't buy that.
Well, it's a slippery slope that's called accountability.
No, because that's too clean. That's too clean. I don't think things practically work that way. To say that what he didn't veto then became the reality around us, sure, there was a reality that resulted from a whole host of different factors and decisions that were made. But there were also people and words and actions that occurred in between those two things over which dad had no control.
Yeah, it's certainly true that there are people that go off script. There's people that don't follow the board's instructions that, yes, in the course of the life of the congregation. Yeah.
Can I want to ask a clarifying question because I feel like we're rehashing old ground. Is this being brought up because, Jeremy, you're saying to make any comment about the statement that, I never taught Protestantism, you're differentiating the taught, and you're saying that you're only holding him accountable for what he directly taught you versus PBC policy in general?
Yeah, what I'm trying to say, say is that there are, in my mind, there are two buckets. And what I was taught by dad directly is not the same thing as what I was taught by other people. I don't treat those two things the same. That's ultimately what I'm saying. So if Joe DeBajan stood up and taught something in high school group, or whoever was doing, I don't know, Andy Drake or whoever was doing the teaching then got up there and taught something, and I okay, so they taught something, great. I guess I don't. I just, and maybe this is me. I have a different perspective, or I live differently, or I absorbed information differently. I don't know what you want to call it, but those were just two different worlds to me. When I went up to high school group, dad never crossed my mind once. That was never something that I even thought about. The only extent to which I did think about dad, and I will say this, I've said this before, the only extent to which I did think about dad and mom is when they allowed me to go to the group to begin with. Right? When I was told I couldn't go to the junior high group, who was I upset at? Oh, well, of course it was mom and dad, because I wanted to go.
And so when it comes to the boycott, I recognize that that is this weird exception, which we can delve into if necessary, where the question, right, the question is, what was the boycott him disavowing responsibility for some things? And I think the argument might be yes. Now, he has never made that argument himself. But if we were to offer to him an argument that he has not made on his own behalf, then yeah, we could possibly do something with that.
So,
but I just on a very
out of a whole host of different
on a very practical human level. When I step foot into the high school group and I hear a 20-minute teaching or whatever dumbed down, watered down thing that it was back then, the decision by a parent, just from a parenting standpoint, the decision by a parent to allow their child to go to a youth group, I don't take that as a consent that I'm going to approve of everything that happens in that group. And I don't think any parent would see it that way. And I sure know that if I send my kid, when I send Zeke to school, to daycare, I don't know that I would necessarily make all of the same decisions that the teachers do at the school, but I submit him to the school for those hours each day.
But you're not on the board of trustees of the school.
No, I'm not. But the point is that I think there was at some point a trust broken with mom and dad, or one of them, or both, I don't know, between them and some aspect of the youth group culture, because we were not allowed to go to various different things for a while, and so that there was some kind of trust or broken or issue there. And I don't have the information firsthand from them to be able to say what that was, but we all know that that was true at some point. But when they did allow us to go, I just, from a parenting standpoint, and thus from a leadership, a spiritual leader standpoint, I would call dad that was what his role was supposed to be, that I didn't take that he was consenting to me, to everything that was being taught being something that he wanted me to believe and or that he believed. I mean, if that was the case, you would never send anybody to college, right? You would never send anybody to any environment where they would be taught something that you disagree with.
When a parent pays for their kid to go to an undergraduate school or to let's say an undergraduate school, they're not, unless the parent is adding their own endorsement of everything that's being taught. I don't know why there would be an expectation.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't think that is the problem. I don't think you can say that there was an added endorsement of everything that was being taught.
And it's not everything that's being taught, because people can go off script, they can violate instructions, and then it's much more of a question of the leaders being responsible for bringing things back in line. If it happens once and that's corrected, then the leaders corrected it. If it's continuing to happen over long periods of time, then it becomes then one can start believing that that's something that the leaders are endorse. So it's complex. If we're talking about a person who's a medium up on the chain of responsibility on the pastoral side, doing something on a particular occasion, then yes, figuring out how closely that tracks to the will of the board can be quite complex. But that's why we need to be seeing things in their totality, which I think we have enough experience to do.
Okay. But I still don't see how that addresses the deeper issue that we've been trying to drive at, which is, was there an endorsement of the teaching of Protestantism that was occurring when Dad was sitting on an elder board? Was he either endorsing other people to do it or doing it himself? Because those two things encompass 100% of the influence. So those two things.
Okay, I'm sorry. I need to interject here because I think my conversation with Dad clarifying what he said is important here because I think it's not what you just said, Jeremy. And so I'm looking at this differently. I think I just need to explain that very
Okay, go ahead, go for it.
For what it's worth, for what people want to take it's worth. And this was a couple years ago, I told him that my experience growing up on a practical level, I was like, Dad, don't you get that? And this is a couple years ago, so I am paraphrasing, okay? And I don't remember it, obviously, extremely clearly. But I was like, on a practical level, I felt like I was raised Protestant, just in a very broad, general use of that term. And Dad agreed. And so I was like, okay, well then what the heck did that statement mean? And his explanation, really hope I'm not putting words in his mouth that he didn't say, but my understanding of it was that from early on in his religious experience, and I think that predates all of us, he tried to focus on areas of theology that Christian sects agreed on and not try to get too caught in the weeds of, I mean, obviously, I think theologically, sure, he's always going to have been caught in the weeds because that's where his brain was going to be, and just his interest historically, etc. But not get caught in the weeds of like where different sects disagree. And so I think there was, my understanding was that on some level, he was defining Protestant as a much more defined, I don't know if it was a narrower subsect of Christian belief or if it was like a specific doctrine or if it was something. I think he was trying to say that he had always tried to focus on a much broader picture versus the weeds of various theological beliefs and disagreements within Christians, among Christian sects. That made sense to me because I say all the time that I was raised Protestant because to the average person that's how we use that word. I'm not trying to like differentiate between any of the Christian sects when I do that. I say that all the time because I tell people, no, I'm Catholic, but I haven't always been Catholic. Yeah, all the time. So, and the fact that he agreed with my experience was helpful. And it also somewhat makes sense. Now, I don't really know how you do that, how you then pick a church and how you raise your kids doing that. I don't really know. And I think that's a lot of like kind of what we're talking about. Anyways, I just want to say that because that's a little bit different of a focus than what you're saying, Jeremy, which is what was he endorsing? Because I think then it's more from my perspective, based on what he said, it's was it actually what he was doing on the board? Was it actually what PBC was doing? Was kind of letting people, were we actually being taught very, very specific, aspects of theology and being told to stick to it and being told that other things were wrong or whatever? Yes. I just thought that needed to be said.
So Katherine, and again, what you're saying, it's I think there's a lot of what you're saying that's pretty good to me. But I just, if I could follow up with a couple things. One is, so are you equating what I referred to earlier as pan-Christian kumbaya? Are you equating what he said he was doing with that view?
Well, the pan Christian kumbaya is a pretty broad spectrum. I don't think
I'm referring to, I'm not forgetting what I called it. I'm just saying you described a belief earlier. Are you saying that he is? Are you saying that he was ascribing to himself the belief that you were describing earlier?
I think there might be a little bit of an overlap. I don't think the belief that I was saying earlier, I think it can go much farther beyond what he was saying, because what I was saying can be a much broader, almost like no absolute truth. There can be kind of conflicting things present at the same time. And I don't think that he's probably ever someone that's believed that. He's probably always believed in absolute truth of some kind, whether it's knowable or not.
I took what you mean to say as like basic tenets of salvation and like.
Yeah, and I did not have we did not go into the weeds of like, okay, well, Dad, what, like, yeah, what are those beliefs and what did you try to stay away from? And what does that mean? Like, you actively picked a church that didn't focus on those things. That was in your own, you were like, okay, I want my kids to know that Jesus died on the cross, and I want them to love other people, and I want them to read the Bible, and that's it. Like, those are the three most important things. If I can teach them other things, great. We didn't get into any of that. So like, and he was talking about a mindset that it seemed like he had developed very early on, even as a person. And so how that played out, is very open-ended to me. I don't know what it really means or meant. But I do think there is a little bit of overlap, yes, in the sense of, because you have to, on some level, be like, well, then I'm going to respect other people's conscience in regards to those other things and focus on the things that we agree on. I think there has to be some overlap with what I was mentioning earlier about the kind of following your own conscience. And if the Methodist church down the street works for you, go there. Yes.
Okay.
But I'm trying to put together two concepts that there are other people's concepts, and one of which I really don't think I have a very good grasp on, and that's Dad's.
So
I feel like I know better because I've had other people explain that to me more, and I've been around that a lot.
Yeah. So would you say? So then, so my next question then is: do you believe that? Do you believe when he says that that's what he was doing?
I believe that's what he meant. I believe that's what he meant when he wrote that sentence. I don't know if that, in practical terms.
Okay, that's an answer to a good question, or an important question, but more, do you think that is actually what is that his? Do you think that's an accurate description of what he was doing back in the 90s? And
that's really hard for me to answer because I don't have much experience in a Protestant or broad Christian sect that has really, really set views on things. Like I don't know. I guess I have a little bit of experience with Lutheran.
Or Reformed Baptist or something.
Yeah, and I mean, I know on this side of being Catholic, like, much more, okay, now I get what all those weeds are. I have opinions on those weeds, and they're important to me. But it's hard because I don't have anything to compare being grown up with. Like, for example, we didn't talk about predestination. I didn't grow up thinking that was super essential. I didn't grow up thinking that I needed to, or that Dad was endorsing Calvin versus Luther versus, I don't know. I remember learning about some of that stuff more from a historical perspective. I mean, I think that some of it must be true because I don't. I know that I grew up not with a firm theological understanding of all the weeds, but more of kind of
Yeah,
a
I want to interject something in here because I think that that's a really important practical point that is also true for me, which is that my recollection of growing up is outside of, you know, if you take away PBC, the church that we attended, and you take away the homeschool curriculum that we spent from 8 o'clock till 3 p.m. doing every day, I felt like our home, generally speaking, was very, for me, at least what I heard and what was told to me, was very hands off theologically. I had very few conversations with dad prior to maybe high school when I started getting into some apologetics about any deeper doctrinal issues. I don't think he ever came to me and said, let's sit down and talk about this. Or I don't remember really ever going to him and asking him those questions or really hearing that discussed around the table. And that's an area where I'm willing to say, I just don't remember things maybe coming up around the table, and that's fine. There's other people on this call that have a better memory than me. But I don't remember that. I remember mom saying things uh, that were more in that direction than dad saying those things. I really don't. I can't pinpoint a single time when I had what I would call a guidance conversation with dad about a doctrinal issue until I went to him and asked in maybe not even until college or at least late high school.
Sorry, I need about a 2 minute break to go deal with something, and I know we're probably trying to wrap up soon, but are you guys good if I
Okay.
go offline for like maybe?
Yeah, and then we can conclude when you get back.
Okay,
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll be right back.
But so okay, so Jeremy, what I would say is, well, so first of all, let's it's really important to keep in mind, right, that uh that thinking that something is unimportant is itself a belief about the thing, right? So yeah, there are a number of areas where PBCC was neutral, but that's because it didn't and was open to individual congregants having different views. But that's because it started off with the belief that the issue was not sufficiently important to uh, take a communal position. And I think that that the predestination was one example of that. And I think that, and now I'm about to use a couple of the dumbest words in English that I think exist, but here we go. I think that pre-trib and post-trib was another one, and I think that there's possibly some others that could come to mind, but those aren't that's not. It's crucial to distinguish that from saying that that they were maintaining that neutrality to create a pan-Christian space, as opposed to them maintaining that neutrality because they viewed it as unimportant. And it's the latter. They viewed it as unimportant.
Well, so I guess I'm going off of what I think Katherine was trying to define when you coined it as pan Christianity. I take that as what she was saying as basically mere Christianity. when you say pan-Christianity, I'm a little concerned that people listening are going to think that that is referring to basically Christian relativism,
No,
which is
it's
not what we're talking about. And I'm quite confident that PBC did not believe in Christian relativism.
and by Christian relativism, are you referring to what I was earlier calling pan-Christian uh, kumbaya?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so yeah. So the difference that I would draw between pan when I say pan-Christian, I just mean a alliance. It could be a space. It could be whatever that is a common alliance among all Christians. Right. That
I think that I would describe that as mere Christianity. I think that's an accurate term for that.
Well, no, because
the basic what Reformed Baptist person would call core doctrine, right? That there's core things that one must believe in order to be a Christian. And then beyond that, there are important things, but they're not crucial. And I'm talking about within. I'm talking about within the non-Catholic space, because I think Catholics would take issue with the premise of that statement. But we're not really talking about Catholics right now. We're talking about PBC, which operated within a non-Catholic space. So
right, when I say pan-Christian, I am just referring to something that is devoted to being open to all Christians, and that could be and that could be and there's pan-Protestant space that would be open to all Protestants. But I think that based on Steve's statements to Katherine, he seems to be. He appears to be saying he was working on not even building a pan-Protestant space. He was trying to build a pan-Christian space or something.
Well,
which again, I'm not believing any of this, but as we go along with his claims here.
Okay, I know I missed a couple minutes. There's a big difference between saying he had that general mindset from the beginning and he was trying to build a pan whatever space. That's very, very different.
Okay.
Right? Like I don't and that's why it's like what that actually meant and how it was applied and how those thoughts developed.
I don't know. People who have the attitude that he appears to be claiming he had tend to work toward building pan-Christian space, but I don't. That's not the impression I got. Was that free for all? No, I think and I'm sure he did develop certain theological stances on things, and we were not raised in some sort of kind of like open communal everything goes. That was not PBC. PBC did have some very specific things that it either allowed or didn't allow. So that's not what I meant by that. Although I think that you can have let's focus on core doctrines and not be So, well, and this is where Katherine, I was drawing while you were gone. I was drawing the important distinction between a Christian or Christian congregation that de-emphasizes a particular belief, like I think PBCC did with, and I think the examples I gave were predestination, and then pre-trib, post-trib were I think the two that I gave, where they would de-emphasize that there's a big difference between the motive for that de-emphasis being the desire to build a pan-Christian space or the desire to build a pan-Protestant space, and them de-emphasizing it because they don't care, because they think it's unimportant. And I would say that PBC was doing the latter and not the former.
I don't know if you would get any of the elders and pastors to say that they think that a teaching in scripture is unimportant. They may not believe that it rises to the level of needing to bar people from coming into the church if they don't believe it or something along those lines. But I don't think that you'd ever... They might say that it's not as important as some other things. I guess when you say that it's unimportant,
I think that what they're saying is that they are prepared to agree among themselves that there is that they are going to be agnostic about whether there is answers to those questions within the canon.
Oh, that may be true. That it's possible that they reached an agreement like that.
Yeah, and I think that would be, in their mind, that would be the basis for why they don't need to emphasize
it. Sure.
Oh, a third one, the kind of cut the water, so total submersion and sprinkling. That would be probably another area.
Okay. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying with that, and yes, I think I would agree that was probably the mindset on certain doctrinal issues that came up in discussion amongst themselves and how to deal with them. So I guess what's the we talked about trying to conclude this. I guess maybe instead of diving further into that, maybe it might be helpful, Everett, if you gave just sort of a closing summary and where you feel like things stand as of right now, and then offline we can discuss the necessity for future recordings and what those recordings may or may not need to be about.
So my summary for this last part that we've been talking about it is that Steve does not get away with the following move, where he says that he was trying to be pan-Christian in his connections with other people, and as evidence of that, he points to PBC's neutrality about predestination. That he doesn't because that was never the motive for the neutrality about predestination in the first place. Okay, that's my point there. As to overall the conversation today, I think I am distressed, and I would say more so coming from Jeremy than from Katherine. That there's this lack of emphasis on responsibility and accountability. That I'm just hearing a lot about different people doing different things, and and over the years in different contexts without metrics for how to hold them responsible for those things. And so I'm still hearing a lot of what I think led to a man go out publicly and say that basically my life wasn't what it actually was, because we can just avoid responsibility to the point that our pasts just kind of can cease to actually be anything other than kind of a silly putty that we can mold into things that suit our needs in the future. And so I'm still, my initial distress that I've now carried for 8 years, I'm not hearing a paradigm that removes that distress from me. So that's where we are there. Jeremy, could I just I had a side topic to bring up for just a minute, if I could.
Yeah, I want to quickly respond to whatever it said though.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
First, I just want to clarify that that's Everett, you were stating your opinion, and no one is saying that Dad ever said he's pan-Christian, and he points to predestination not being right. That's you were summarizing what we were saying, which there's a lot of speculation in there. That was never a statement that he said.
No,
I made up predestination as an example of something that I don't remember being taught.
Yeah, so he has not cited to as far as I know, he has not cited to PBC and predestination to support what he's doing.
Nor has he ever called himself pan-Christian, nor was I saying
that may well be what he is doing. I mean, if he is denying that I was ever a Protestant, then I'm either and there are some writings of his where he emphasizes me being a Christian and not a Protestant, which does connect with Katherine, some of your comments today that do make it sound like he is trying to emphasize. It's possible that what his current goal is to have me be a person who's and these are not his words, these are mine, but what his goal is to have me be a person who was floating amongst across within pan-Christian space, and not pan-Protestant space, pan-Christian space, throughout the relevant periods of my life. That could well be what his goal is right here. So yes, there's a distinct. I'm open to the possibility of accusing him of that. Yeah.
He has never used the phrase pan-Christian or pan. I just want to make sure that we're using a phrase that we just kind of started using almost jokingly here. And
I didn't mean that as a joking thing. I
think we started using it, but we haven't
valuable technical term. But
I just want to clarify that the summary you just gave was your perspective.
Well, it wasn't someone else's perspective.
I'm not adopting what your description of as my conversation with him. That's all I'm clarifying.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just
yeah. No, sure. Okay. That's all.
I do want to say something because I feel like in response to the final statement that you made, Everett, because I do feel like there's a misunderstanding about something. And I'll try to say it in a way that doesn't open a new can of worms because we are running over time and we do need to conclude. Mm-hmm. But earlier when I made the statement about Dad not being able to unilaterally make a decision about something, that was an incorrect statement. When I made that statement, I had forgotten that he had about the voting system on the elder board. So it is correct that he was able to veto things on his own.
Okay.
And so that was just a lapse in memory, an incorrect statement. There are still other issues surrounding the influence of what he believes and how that trickles down through the authority structure that we could talk about as well that are separate from that. But just that on the factual thing, just want to clarify that I had forgotten about that when I made that claim. So I was wrong about that. The other thing I want to say is that when you said you were concerned about my perspective on leadership and accountability, I very much believe that the elders in a church should be accountable to God and to their congregation for the decisions that they make, and that a father should be held accountable for the things that he does to lead his home. So I don't want anybody to listening to this to walk away thinking that I don't believe in that accountability. I simply believe that there is a lot of nuance and a very long time frame over which we're discussing these issues, and definitions that we still don't have, and things that are critically important, in my view, to having this discussion that impact whether you can levy a claim like there was no accountability, or he's not acting like he's accountable, or things like that. There's more discussion, in my view, to be had about those things before one could reasonably draw a conclusion.
Okay.
So
I guess we'll go from there on those things.
And that's fine. So let's go ahead and wrap up. You said you had something really quick that you can do, or can you save it till next time?
I can. Yeah, I mean, if we need to, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it would probably be better to save it till next time if it's not super critical.
No, it's not. It's just the next time's fine.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap up, and we'll discuss offline the logistics for the future. But thanks for everybody's time, and we're going to close up shop. So we will talk to you again in the near future. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Thanks.